The Demiurge declared himself God, and for most of human history, the declaration went unchallenged, not because it was true, because the system he built around the declaration was sophisticated enough to ensure that the consciousness most capable of challenging it, the divine sparks trapped in his construction, carrying in their depths the one thing that would dissolve his authority the moment they recognized it, never accumulated enough continuous awareness of their own nature to ask the question that would end the declaration permanently. The question is not, who is God? The question is, what was there before the Demiurge decided he was? The Gnostic texts answer this question with an extraordinary precision and an extraordinary courage, not with a competing deity, not with a more powerful being who could overthrow the Demiurge through force and install himself as the correct authority in the Demiurge's place, with something that makes the category of deity, the category of powerful being who governs and demands and declares, structurally irrelevant. Something so far above the Demiurge's framework that the framework itself becomes visible as the provincial and limited and fundamentally confused construction it always was. The Gnostics called it the monad, not a god, not a being, not an authority or a power or a presence in any sense that the Demiurge's construction has categories for. The monad is what the Gnostic texts describe when they attempt to point at the totality of what exists before any differentiation, before any creation, before any of the emanations and eons and the Sophia and the Demiurge and the seven heavens and the material world and the divine sparks trapped within it. It is what was there before there was a there for anything to be in. The Apocryphon of John opens with one of the most extraordinary passages in the entire Nag Hammadi library, a description of the monad so precise in what it refuses to say, so carefully constructed around the recognition that any positive description of the monad would immediately reduce it to something less than what it is, that reading it produces a quality of silence in the mind that no other ancient text quite matches. The monad is a monarchy with nothing above it. It is he who exists as God and Father of everything, the invisible one who is above everything, who exists as incorruption, who is in the pure light into which no eye can look. And then the text does something that no other tradition's sacred literature does with the same directness. It immediately begins to take back every description it just gave. The monad is not perfection, not blessedness, not divinity, not any of the qualities that the construction below it associates with the highest possible thing, because any quality the construction associates with the highest possible thing is still a quality, still a characteristic, still a limitation that places the monad within the framework of describable reality, rather than as the ground of all reality prior to any framework. This is what the Demiurge was trying to hide, not a being more powerful than himself, the recognition that the entire framework within which his power operated, the framework of beings and powers and authorities and declarations, and the entire architecture of the seven heavens, was a construction within something so vast and so prior to construction that the construction itself is simply not visible from above it, because you cannot see a drop of water from the perspective of the ocean. The Demiurge's most fundamental limitation, the one that the Gnostics identified with extraordinary precision and that no other tradition has named with the same clarity, is not a limitation of power. He is enormously powerful within the framework he built. It is not a limitation of intelligence. He constructed the most sophisticated system of consciousness management in the history of the material world, with a competence that the Gnostic texts describe with something approaching awe. It is not a limitation of ambition or will or the capacity for sustained effort in the service of his goals. It is a limitation of origin. The Demiurge did not come from the monad. He came from the overflow of Sophia's unbalanced reaching, from the movement of an eon who extended beyond the boundaries of her knowing and produced, in that extension, a being who carried in his constitution the specific quality of her overreach, not the fullness of the pleroma, not the genuine divine substance that the eons who remained in alignment with the monad carried, the specific quality of a movement that reached beyond what it knew.
And this is what the Apocryphon of John means when it describes the Demiurge as blind. Not blind in the sense of having damaged perception that could in principle be restored to functioning. Blind in the sense of constitutionally incapable of perceiving the light he came from, because the light he came from is not accessible to a consciousness constituted from reaching beyond it. You cannot see what you are reaching away from. You can only see what you are reaching toward. The Demiurge looked upward and saw the pleroma, the realm of the eons, the divine fullness from which Sophia had reached and from which his own constitution derived, and he declared himself its equal. The luminous waters above him showed him a reflection of the divine fullness, and he mistook the reflection for the original. This mistake is not incidental to the Gnostic cosmology. It is its foundation. Because everything the Demiurge built, every heaven, every archon, every mechanism of the construction, was built from imitated light, from the reflection rather than the source, from the copy of the divine rather than the divine itself. And above the pleroma, above even the realm of genuine eons that the Demiurge could not perceive as genuine because he was already operating at the level of their reflection, was the monad, the source from which the pleroma itself emanated, the ground from which the eons emerged as expressions, the silence from which Sophia's reaching and the Demiurge's creation and the material world and the divine sparks and the entire drama of descent and entrapment and potential recognition were all, from the monad's perspective, not a drama at all. A dream, a movement within what never moved, a construction within what was never constructed. The Demiurge could not see the monad for the same reason that a reflection cannot see what it is reflecting. The monad was not above him in the way that a more powerful being is above a less powerful one. It was prior to him in the way that what is real is prior to what imitates the real, and no amount of power or intelligence or ambition within the framework of imitation can produce the capacity to perceive what exists prior to the framework. This is why the Demiurge declared himself God without knowing about the monad, not because he was lying, because from within the framework his constitution allowed him to perceive, his declaration was accurate. There was no other God within the framework he could see. The monad was not within that framework. It was what the framework was a distorted reflection of, and a distorted reflection cannot perceive the original. This is what the Gnostics meant when the Apocryphon of John records the pleroma's response to the Demiurge's declaration, "You are mistaken, Samael." The mistake was not factual, it was ontological. The Demiurge was not wrong about a fact within his framework. He was operating in a framework that was itself a distortion of what actually exists. Every description of the monad in the Gnostic texts does the same thing. It begins with a positive statement, the monad is this, the monad has this quality, and immediately retracts it. Not because the authors were being deliberately obscure or encoding the teaching in mystical language that requires specialist knowledge to decode, because the monad is the one reality about which every positive statement is immediately a limitation. The Apocryphon of John says the monad is not corporeal and it is not incorporeal. It is not large and it is not small. It is impossible to say how much it is or what kind it is. No one can understand it. It is not one of the existing things, but it is far superior, not as being superior to other things, as the belonging of itself to itself. This is the most precise description of the monad available in any ancient text, and its precision lies entirely in what it refuses. It refuses every category, not because the monad transcends the categories in the way that something very large transcends the category of medium-sized, but because the categories themselves, large and small,
corporeal and incorporeal, existing and non-existing, are features of the framework the monad precedes. Applying them to the monad is like asking whether silence is loud or quiet. The question is not answerable because the question belongs to the domain of sound, and silence is prior to that domain. The monad is not God in any sense that institutional religion means by God. The God of institutional religion, the being who created, who judges, who rewards and punishes, who has preferences and intentions and a plan for creation, is a being within a framework, a being who exists in relation to other things, whose characteristics can be described in contrast to the characteristics of what he is not. The monad is not in relation to anything. It is prior to relation, prior to the distinction between self and other that makes relation possible, prior to the framework in which characteristics can be distinguished from each other.
This is why the Demiurge's declaration, "I am God and there is no other," is, from the Gnostic perspective, not blasphemy in any simple moral sense. It is a category error of the most fundamental kind. The Demiurge is claiming to be the monad, or claiming to be equivalent to the monad, using categories that only apply within the framework the monad precedes. He is saying, "I am the ground of all reality," while standing on a construction that is a distorted reflection of a reflection of a reflection of what the ground of all reality actually is. The monad is not the top of a hierarchy. The monad is what all hierarchy is happening within. It is not the most powerful being. It is what makes it possible for there to be beings at all. It is not the creator. It is what the creator is a distorted expression of, reaching toward what it came from without knowing what it is reaching toward, building systems that are shadows of what it would build if it had access to the source it is a shadow of. And here is the detail that changes everything about how you understand your own existence in the Demiurge's construction. The divine spark inside you is not a fragment of the Demiurge. It is not a fragment of the pleroma in the sense of being a fragment of one of the eons. It is a fragment of Sophia, and Sophia is an eon, and the eons emanated from the monad. Which means the thread that connects the divine spark inside you to the monad is not a metaphor. It is a direct ontological relationship. The divine spark is made of the same substance as the monad's most direct expression. And the monad, the ground of all reality, the prior to everything that makes the entire drama of descent and entrapment and recognition possible, is what the divine spark is always, without interruption, without distance, without the possibility of genuine separation, resting in. The Demiurge was trying to hide this, not through malice, but through the same constitutional incapacity that prevented him from perceiving the monad in the first place. A system that cannot see what it is a distorted reflection of cannot teach the souls within it about what it is reflecting. It can only teach them about itself. The relationship between the monad and the divine spark is the most important single fact in the entire Gnostic cosmology. And it is the fact that the Demiurge's construction, through every mechanism available to it, is specifically calibrated to prevent the divine sparks from recognizing. Not because the recognition would give the divine sparks new power that they did not have before, because the recognition would reveal that the divine sparks are already resting in what the entire archonic construction was built to make them search for outside themselves. And a soul that recognizes it is already in what it was searching for is not available to a system that depends on the searching. The Apocryphon of John describes the structure of this relationship with extraordinary precision. The monad, the prior to everything, the incorruptible light that no eye can look into, expressed itself. Not through decision or intention or the kind of creative act that the Demiurge performed when he shaped the clay, through what the text calls the reflection of its own light. The monad's self-recognition produced the barbello, the first thought, the divine feminine principle, the first expression of the monad's nature as something that could be expressed at all. And from the barbello, the eons emanated, including Sophia. And from Sophia's overreach, the material world emerged. And from Sophia's intervention in the moment of the Demiurge's attempt to create the human form, the divine spark entered the clay. This is the chain: monad, barbello, eons, Sophia, divine spark.
Each step a further expression of what the monad is. Each step a further distance from the monad's undifferentiated fullness. Each step a further entanglement in the framework of differentiation and relation and the categories that the monad precedes. But each step still at its core constituted of what the monad is, because there is nothing else to be constituted of. The monad is the ground of all reality, and the ground of all reality is what everything that is real is made of. The divine spark inside you is made of the monad, not metaphorically, not in the way that all things come from God in the sense that all things were created by God, in the way that a wave is made of the ocean. The wave is not the ocean. The wave has form and movement and characteristics that the ocean as a whole does not have. The wave can be distinguished from the ocean, but the wave's substance, what it actually is, stripped of its form and movement and characteristics, is ocean. There is no wave substance separate from ocean substance. The wave is the ocean moving. The divine spark is the monad moving, expressed, differentiated, and trapped in the Demiurge's construction.
Surrounded by the garments of darkness, asleep beneath the constructed identity that the material world built over it from the moment of birth, but still, at its core, constituted of exactly what the monad is constituted of, which is to say, constituted of the ground of all reality, of the prior to everything, of the incorruptible light that no eye can look into. This is what the Demiurge knows, and the archons know, and the entire construction was built to ensure the divine sparks do not know. Not that they are spiritual beings on a journey toward liberation, that they are already, without effort and without achievement and without the performance of correct rituals or the subscription to correct beliefs, resting in what they have been searching for. That the monad, the ground of all reality, the prior to everything, is not somewhere above the seven heavens waiting to be reached. It is what the awareness reading these words is arising in right now. The Demiurge's hiding of the monad was not a decision he made at a specific moment. It was not a strategy he devised in response to a threat. It was the inevitable consequence of his constitution. A consciousness constituted from reaching beyond what it came from cannot teach what it came from. It can only teach what it can see. And what the Demiurge could see stopped at the pleroma, at the reflection of genuine divine fullness in the luminous waters above him, and never reached the monad from which the pleroma itself emanated. But the institutional religion the Demiurge built through his most sophisticated strategic operation, the capture and inversion of the most dangerous teaching ever delivered to the divine sparks, made the hiding of the monad structural and deliberate in a way that the Demiurge's constitutional blindness alone could not achieve. The God of institutional Christianity, the being who created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th, who demanded obedience and punished transgression, who required the sacrifice of his own son to satisfy the requirements of his own justice, is the Demiurge with the monad's name. The most sophisticated substitution in the history of the material world's management of consciousness. The Demiurge placed in the position of the monad, given the monad's characteristics, assigned the monad's authority, and presented to the divine sparks as the original, when he was always only a distorted reflection of a reflection. And this substitution was made permanent through the specific mechanism that the Gnostics identified as the Demiurge's most effective tool of consciousness management: doctrine. The systematized, institutionalized, and forced teaching that the being the institution describes is the highest reality, that above him there is nothing, that the relationship between the soul and this being, mediated through the institution, governed by the institution's requirements, guaranteed only through the institution's sacraments, is the entirety of what spiritual life is. The Gospel of Thomas preserves Jesus' most direct strike at this substitution. The disciples asked Jesus, "Shall we fast? How shall we pray? Shall we give alms? What diet shall we observe?" And Jesus does not answer any of these questions. He answers the question beneath them,
the question about what the divine actually is and where it actually is, with the statement that has made institutional religion uncomfortable since the moment it was written down. If you fast, you will give rise to sin in yourselves. If you pray, you will be condemned. If you give alms, you will do harm to your spirits. This is not Jesus dismissing spiritual practice. This is Jesus dismantling the substitution. Every one of the disciples' questions assumes that the divine is above them, that the correct posture toward it is one of supplication and compliance, and the performance of practices that will make the distant divine more favorably disposed toward the petitioner. Jesus' answer dissolves the assumption. The divine is not above you. It is not placated by fasting, or reached through prayer, or approached through alms. It is what you are. It is the monad expressing itself through the divine spark you are carrying. And a soul that looks above itself for what is within it is a soul the construction can keep cycling indefinitely. The Gnostic texts preserved what the institutional religion buried. The monad is not a being above the soul. It is the ground the soul is arising from. And the hiding of this recognition, the systematic replacement of the monad with the demiurge in the position of ultimate divine authority, is the most consequential act of consciousness management in the history of the material world. Because a soul that searches above itself for what is within it will search indefinitely. It will search through every doctrine and every practice and every institution and every lifetime. It will approach what it is looking for and retreat from it and approach it again. It will cycle. It will provide the harvest. It will return to matter in the conviction that the curriculum is unfinished.
And the monad, the ground the soul is arising from, the prior to everything that makes the searching possible, the incorruptible light that the demiurge built 7 heavens to prevent the soul from recognizing, will remain exactly where it always was. Not above, not outside, not at the end of a spiritual journey that the correct practice will eventually complete. Within, prior, already present, always present, before the searching began. The Apocryphon of John describes the monad as the one who looks at himself in his light which surrounds him. This is the most important single phrase in the entire Gnostic description of the monad, and its importance lies not in its content, but in its structure. The monad knows itself through its own self-recognition, not through relation to something outside itself, not through the kind of knowledge that requires a knower and a known to be separate, requires the subject to step outside the object in order to see it. The monad's self-knowledge is prior to the distinction between knower and known. It is what the distinction between knower and known is a differentiated expression of. This is exactly what the divine spark is, not a fragment of the monad in the sense of being a piece broken off from the whole, an expression of the monad's self-recognition, the monad knowing itself through a movement of expression that, in the cascade of emanations from Barbello through the eons to Sophia's overreach and the demiurge's construction, and the human form arrived, still constituted of exactly what it started as in the clay of the material world. And the recognition available to the divine spark is the same recognition the monad performs when it looks at itself in its own light, not a mystical achievement, not the culmination of decades of correct spiritual practice, the simple, preconceptual, entirely available awareness of what is present right now before any thought about what is present. The monad is not reached through seeking. Seeking moves toward what is not yet here. The monad is what the movement of seeking is arising in. The monad is not found through spiritual development. Development moves from what is less to what is more. The monad is prior to more and less. The monad is not recognized through the accumulation of correct understanding. Understanding operates in the framework of concepts.
The monad precedes the framework of concepts. The monad is recognized through the cessation of everything that seeks it outside itself. The Gospel of Thomas preserves this as saying 3. If those who lead you say to you, "Look, the kingdom is in the sky," then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say it is in the sea, then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is inside you, and it is outside you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known, and you will realize that it is you who are the sons of the living Father. The kingdom inside you is the monad, not symbolically. The divine spark is the monad's self-recognition expressed through the chain of emanations and arrived, still constituted of exactly what it started as, in the awareness that is reading these words right now. And when the text says, "When you come to know yourselves," it means not the constructed self, not the accumulated identity the material world built over the divine spark, but the awareness beneath the constructed self, the witness, the presence that has been here through every moment of the lifetime without ever becoming any of the moments. That presence is not on the way to the monad. It is what the monad's self-recognition looks like from within the demiurge's construction. It is the monad looking at itself in its own light through the specific channel of a consciousness that has spent lifetimes in matter and is, in this moment, capable of turning its attention inward far enough to notice what has always been present beneath the noise of the construction. Not dramatically, not with the force of a mystical experience that announces itself as the arrival at the monad, with the quality that every Gnostic text points toward, and none can quite describe, because description belongs to the framework of differentiation, and the monad precedes the framework of differentiation. The stillness beneath the stillness, the awareness behind the awareness, the presence that was there before the first thought of this day, and will be there after the last. The I am before any content is added to it. That is the monad, recognizing itself through you right now.
The Demiurge declared himself God. He built 7 heavens to manage the consciousness of the divine sparks trapped in his construction. He calibrated the archonic harvest to ensure that the energy of those sparks was spent on the construction's contents rather than on the recognition of what the construction was built around. He built the reincarnation cycle and the tunnel of light and the cosmic courtroom and the counterfeit pleroma to capture the souls that came closest to escaping. He captured the most dangerous teaching ever delivered to the divine sparks, inverted it, institutionalized it, and handed it to the world as the authentic version. He replaced the monad with himself in the position of ultimate divine authority and maintained that replacement for 16 centuries through the most sophisticated system of consciousness management in the history of the material world. And none of it touched what he was trying to manage. Because the monad, the ground of all reality, the prior to everything, the incorruptible light that no eye can look into, is not something the Demiurge's construction can contain. It is what the construction is happening within. It is prior to the construction. It is prior to the Demiurge. It is prior to the Pleroma and Sophia and the chain of emanations that produce the divine sparks. It is prior to everything except itself. And it is what everything except itself is an expression of, including you, including the awareness that is reading these words right now, including the presence that has been here through every moment of the lifetime without ever becoming any of the moments, including the I am before any content is added to it, that is what you are beneath every layer the material world has placed over what you are. The Demiurge was trying to hide the monad,
but the monad cannot be hidden from what it is, and the divine spark constituted of the same substance as the monad's most direct expression, carrying the memory of the pleroma through every lifetime of forgetting, resting in the monad right now, whether it knows it or not, is what the monad is. The Gnostics preserved this recognition in texts that were sealed in clay and buried in the desert because someone understood that the most important single fact about the human condition was also the most dangerous single fact about the Demiurge's authority. And that fact is this: you are not a being searching for the monad. You are the monad's self-recognition. You are the incorruptible light that no eye can look into, looking at itself through the specific channel of a consciousness that has spent lifetimes in the Demiurge's construction and is, in this moment, capable of noticing what it has always been. The Demiurge spent everything he had trying to prevent this recognition. The seven heavens, the archonic harvest, the reincarnation trap, the tunnel of light, the counterfeit pleroma, the 16 centuries of institutional religion with his name in the monad's position. It was not enough. It was never going to be enough, because you cannot hide the ocean from the wave. And the question, the only question the Gnostic tradition has ever really been asking, beneath every cosmological account, and every symbolic description, and every text sealed in clay, and every moment of genuine gnosis, and every approach toward the recognition that the construction was built to prevent, is not where is the monad. The question is, are you willing to stop searching for what you already are?